this week. Goodbye. Tonight at 10, it's understood Roman Abramovich suffered symptoms of a suspected poisoning at peace talks over the war in Ukraine earlier this month. Sources close to the owner of Chelsea Football Club say he had sore eyes and skin peeling. 2 Ukrainian negotiators were also affected.
It does appear that there are organophosphates, aka nerve agents, involved, and we really need to see the medical records.
Ukraine's president says he wants peace without delay and would discuss a neutral status for his country as part of any deal with Russia. Peace talks are expected to resume tomorrow in Istanbul, but for now, the war here in Ukraine rages on.
Some of the other leaders have said that if they intervened in the war, if there was a no-fly zone, it could be World War III.
Maybe. But if they don't close the sky, they will be next.
Also tonight, shock at the Oscars. The Academy condemns Will Smith for slapping the comedian Chris Rock after a joke about his wife. Smith blamed the pressure of fame.
In this business, you got to be able to have people disrespecting you. And you got to smile and you got to pretend like that's okay.
The first police fines over parties held in government buildings while COVID restrictions were in place are expected tomorrow. And the city of Shanghai, with 25 million people, goes into lockdown after a dramatic rise in COVID infections.
And coming up in the sport on the BBC News channel, should he stay or should he go? England captain Joe Root gets the backing of interim head coach Paul Collingwood after another Test Series defeat.
Good evening. It's been reported that the Russian billionaire Roman Abramovich and 2 Ukrainians have suffered a suspected chemical poisoning after peace talks over the war in Ukraine. It's alleged to have happened earlier this month on the border with Belarus. It's understood the Chelsea Football Club owner, who's thought to be acting as a go-between in the negotiations, suffered sore eyes and skin peeling. The 2 Ukrainians affected and Mr. Abramovich have all made a full recovery. Here's our security correspondent, Frank Gardner.
Recent pictures of Roman Abramovich at Tel Aviv's Ben Gurion airport. But 11 days earlier, on March the 3rd, something happened to him and 2 others following peace talks on Ukraine's border with Belarus. Hours after these Russian and Ukrainian delegates met, 3 of them, including Mr. Abramovich, suffered searing pain in the eyes, dimness of vision, and inflamed reddened skin. Later that night, in the Ukrainian capital Kyiv, according to the investigative website Bellingcat, all 3 were suffering from the symptoms of intentional poisoning with a chemical agent.
It is potentially very serious, and hopefully the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons will be called in to investigate. both the Ukraine and Russia are signatories to the Chemical Weapons Convention. So that would be within the remit of both, particularly Ukraine, to bring in.
There was no immediate comment from Moscow and no proof that Russia was behind this. But back in 2020, the Russian opposition activist Alexei Navalny was hospitalized and nearly died in Siberia after being poisoned with a nerve agent Novichok. He recovered, but Bellingcat's investigators were able to prove it was the work of Russia's Federal Security Service, the FSB. 2 years before that, the same nerve agent, Novichok, was used in an attempt to murder the former KGB officer, Sergei Skripal, in the town of Salisbury. He was saved by an antidote, atropine. Roman Abramovich's associates say he's fine now and he intends to continue trying to broker a peace between his native Russia and Ukraine. It's thought that whoever poisoned him and the other delegates was looking to sabotage those peace talks by sending a sinister warning.
Frank, this is all very murky. Indeed, was it a chemical poisoning?
Well, you're right, it's kind of cloak and dagger stuff. It depends who you listen to. So a Ukrainian MP said, didn't happen, nonsense. An unnamed US official has said, well, it could have been environmental factors, but the investigators are in no doubt whatsoever, and nor is Hamish de Bretton Gordon there. And interestingly, the Ukrainian foreign minister has commented on national television tonight, if you're going to peace talks, peace negotiations with the Russians, don't eat or drink anything and be careful who you shake hands with.
Okay. Frank, many thanks. Frank Gardner, our security correspondent. And for the very latest on the war in Ukraine, let's join my colleague Ben Brown, who's live in the western city of Lviv. Ben, over to you.
Clive, thank you very much indeed. Yes, good evening from Lviv. Well, those peace talks that Roman Abramovich has been part of resume tomorrow in Istanbul. And just ahead of them, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has made an offer to Russia. He said his country could adopt the status of neutrality if that would help to end the war here, although it would have to be agreed in a referendum. Well, on the battlefield, Russian advances have stalled recently. Now, this map shows the areas of Ukraine currently under Russian control. Russian troops still haven't been able to encircle the capital, Kyiv. The closest they are is about 15 miles away. Elsewhere, Ukraine has set up humanitarian corridors to evacuate civilians from besieged towns and cities. But those corridors haven't opened yet because of fears Russian forces might attack people who are fleeing. Well, our first report tonight is from Jeremy Bowen in Kyiv and does contain some distressing images.
The Russians attacked an oil storage depot in western Ukraine. The war is settling into a deadly daily grind. Medics live and sleep at the hospitals. There's no time to get home. In one in Kyiv, the patients include a Ukrainian diplomat. Victoria said it was ironic that she was wounded in her own home when she came back from Belarus, Russia's ally. But I won't lie, she said, I'm very scared. Gennadi's home was also hit. The Russians thought they'd be greeted with hugs, he says. But if we don't get weapons to take the offensive, missiles and planes, the war's going to drag on for a long time. President Zelensky hinted at compromise to Russian journalists on Ukrainian neutrality and territory.
I understand. It's impossible to force Russia completely from the Ukrainian territory. It would lead to the Third World War. I understand it, and that is why I'm talking about a compromise.
In Kyiv, a few cafes are open and it's less tense than a month ago. Slava and Katerina were intrigued by what the president had said.
Nobody's saying we should give up the territories, but there should be some compromise or concession.
We hope that Putin is a sane person, but it's a very small hope.
But at the end of the lonely roads out to the frontline towns, the war feels much closer. In Borispil, facing the Russians to the east, people risk a trip to the market. But the mayor shows off his Ukrainian-made assault rifle. and says that NATO's only choice is to give them the planes and the tanks they need to beat the Russians.
I think if Putin wins this war, they don't stop. Next will be Poland, maybe Romanian, Bulgarian, and other countries in European Union. I think.
Biden and some of the other leaders have said that if they intervened in the war, if there was a no-fly zone, it could be World War III.
Maybe. But if they don't close the sky, they will be next.
Ukraine's president was right to talk about compromise, but it may never happen. Ceasefire agreements that work generally require either two sides fighting each other to exhaustion, or the weaker side making concessions because it fears defeat, or an outside intervention. None of those conditions applies in Ukraine at the moment. So the most likely option is a continuation of a war of attrition. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Kyiv.
Well, in the south of this country, Ukrainian troops have had some success in recent days in pushing back Russian forces, raising doubts about whether the Kremlin will still try to seize control of the whole coastline. Now, in the strategic port city of Odessa, the immediate fear of Russian bombardment has eased a bit, but people there are still unsure whether that's just a temporary lull in the fighting. From there, Andrew Harding reports.
Somewhere out there is the Russian Navy. And on Ukraine's Black Sea coast, no one is letting down their guard. We've had a lot of incoming fire, rockets, bombs, says Anatoly. And with them, the fear of an amphibious landing. And yet, in the nearby port city of Odessa, clubs and restaurants are reopening. Not exactly packed yet, but the mood here appears to be easing.
The city is coming alive. I feel something like this.
Why is that?
I don't know. I think the fear is go away a little bit.
People think that Odessa won't be attacked?
I think yes.
And here's why he may be right. Along the Black Sea coast, Russian hardware and Russian plans lie in ruins. The Kremlin's advance here has stalled or even been pushed back. Which may explain these tense scenes in Kherson, a frontline city occupied by the Russians. But they're having growing trouble controlling it.
When they started using this gas, smoke pellets and stun grenades, so I started running. Since they are using more threatening techniques and tactics, I think they are in panic.
Panic or not, back in Odessa, Ukrainians are still preparing for a Russian attack from land, sea or air.
But what if this war is edging towards some kind of a stalemate? Of course, anything is still possible, but here in the south, Ukrainians increasingly are looking for reasons to be hopeful, maybe even confident.
A guide takes us down into Odessa's ancient catacombs. These vast tunnels once helped families shelter from the Nazis.
There's some graffiti here from the 1940s. It reads, "Hitler go, death to fascism."
Now, the past and present seem to mingle in the musty air. And yet, from its catacombs to its clubs, today's Odessa is embracing optimism, as if that alone were a form of defiance against the Kremlin. Andrew Harding, BBC News in southern Ukraine.
Well, let's get some analysis now from our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, who joins us from the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. And Lise, let's talk about this offer then from President Zelensky to make Ukraine a neutral state. Now, could that make a difference to these peace talks that are due to resume tomorrow in Istanbul?
President Zelensky has talked about neutrality before. He's talked about not joining NATO. And while it does seem clear there's some progress on some issues, some language, it's also clear that there is not going to be major progress at the negotiating table until, for Russia, there's major progress on taking territory. We heard last week from the Defense Ministry that, in its words, liberating eastern Ukraine was the main priority. And while Russia has taken ground in the south and the east, it doesn't control the entire area. And we still don't really know what its plans are for other places, including this capital, Kyiv. Now, President Zelensky does use the word compromise. He used it when he spoke to the Russian journalists, proposing that Russia pull back to the areas that it controlled before the invasion, and they'd come up with a compromise. But pulling back from territory isn't a compromise for President Putin. It would be a climb down, a humiliating climb down. And for him, of course, we have to bear in mind, this isn't just about Ukraine. It's also about his relationship with NATO and, of course, the United States. Now, President Biden has been speaking about his comment about, for God's sake, this man cannot remain in power, saying it was his moral outrage, not the policy of his administration. But he didn't take back those words in the same way that President Putin hasn't taken back the words that he said that Ukraine, as a country, should not exist.
All right, Lise, thank you very much indeed. Lise Doucet there in Kyiv. Well, that's it from me and the whole team here in Ukraine. Clive, back to you in the studio.
Ben, many thanks for that. Ben Brown there in Lviv in western Ukraine. Now, the actor Will Smith has apologised to the organisers of the Oscars and to his fellow nominees after stunning a global audience of millions by slapping the comedian Chris Rock on stage at last night's ceremony. The comic had made a joke about the actor's wife, Jada Pinkett Smith. It happened just before he accepted the Oscar for Best Actor, and so far Smith hasn't apologised to Chris Rock. Police say no complaint has been filed, though tonight the Film Academy has condemned Smith's actions. Our culture editor, Katie Razzle, has sent us this report from Los Angeles, which contains some flashing images.
Will Smith was always going to make news at the Oscars, but he dominated the headlines for all the wrong reasons. And now the Academy has condemned what happened and announced a formal review. While presenting an award at the ceremony, comedian Chris Rock had made a joke about Will Smith's wife's lack of hair.
Jada, I love you. G.I. Jane 2, can't wait to see it, all right?
Watch Jada Pinkett Smith's reaction. It clearly got to her husband, who strode onto the stage and delivered this.
Oh, wow!
At first, it wasn't clear if it was an elaborate joke, but those involved weren't laughing. The TV broadcast muted the sound, but inside the Dolby Theatre, shocked guests watched as Will Smith continued to abuse Rock.
Keep my wife's name out your mouth! I'm going to.
Now, at this point, I can only laugh. Now, y'all know I've been struggling with alopecia and...
Jada Pinkett Smith has previously opened up on social media about her hair loss.
Right here.
So the joke wasn't in the best taste. But there's clearly history here too. When he hosted the Oscars in 2016, Chris Rock mocked the couple after she'd announced she was boycotting the awards for their lack of diversity.
Is she on a TV show? Jada's gonna boycott the Oscars. Jada boycotting the Oscars is like me boycotting Rihanna's panties. I wasn't invited.
Last night, long before the slap, one of the hosts, actress Regina Hall, said this.
Will Smith, you're married, but you know what? You're on the list and looks like Jada approved you, so you get on up here.
Will Smith laughing off that joke about the couple's reportedly open relationship. He wasn't laughing later, to the upset of those there.
It was kind of hard to watch, I guess, because it's probably the best night of his life in a way, and then also might have some repercussions.
And the Oscar goes to...
And when that more predictable event of the night happened...
Will Smith!
His Best Actor win, making him only the 5th black man in history to do so. The only question was whether he would apologise.
Now, I know to do what we do, you got to be able to take abuse. You got to be able to have people talk crazy about you. In this business, you got to be able to have people disrespecting you. And you got to smile and you got to pretend like that's okay. I want to apologize to the Academy. I want to apologize to all my fellow nominees. Love will make you do crazy things.
It overshadowed what had the makings of a glorious night, with a film about deaf culture making history. Troy Kotsur was named Best Supporting Actor, the first deaf man ever to win an Oscar.
This is dedicated to the deaf community, the CODA community, and the disabled community. This is our moment.
CODA, the movie in which he stars, also snatched Best Picture. Jane Campion became only the third woman ever to win Best Director for The Power of the Dog. For the Brits, Sir Kenneth Branagh finally won an Oscar after 7 unsuccessful attempts, original screenplay for Belfast, and Riz Ahmed was rewarded for his short film The Long Goodbye. Will Smith appeared defiant after the ceremony, posting this video saying he and his wife got dressed up to choose chaos. He apparently partied into the night, but may now have to face up to the consequences of what he's done.
So what happens next? It seems pretty clear they won't be taking away Will Smith's Oscar. Whoopi Goldberg, an Academy Board member, said as much this morning. But I've had a look at the Academy's Code of Conduct. It bans uninvited physical conduct and abusive and threatening behaviour. Will Smith certainly broke those rules. They could expel him, they could censure him, they could prevent him from voting. But I have to say, people in this town are divided over what happened. And in the end, Hollywood is often pretty forgiving of its big stars.
OK, Katie, thank you. Katie Russell there live in Los Angeles. The BBC understands that the first police fines for breaches of COVID-19 rules in relation to government lockdown parties will be issued as soon as tomorrow. The Met Police investigation into 12 events was launched in late January. Ben Wright is at Westminster for us tonight. Just take us back to the allegations, Ben.
Well, Clive, viewers might remember that before Russia invaded Ukraine, all the talk at Westminster was about parties in Number 10 and Whitehall during lockdown. It was a saga that plunged Boris Johnson's premiership into crisis. First, we had that internal Whitehall report, a partial report that concluded that COVID rules were broken. And for the last 2 months, the Metropolitan Police has been investigating whether people should be fined. So they've sent out over 100 questionnaires to officials and ministers, including Boris Johnson and the Chancellor, trying to work out what happened at 12 separate events in 2020 and 2021. And we know from sources tonight that the first fines are expected to be issued by the Met tomorrow. These are fixed penalty notices for breaches of COVID rules. The Met had always said that it would reveal how many fines it issued. And Number 10 has always said that if the Prime Minister receives a fixed penalty notice, they would let us all know. So, Clive, this saga did not disappear. It has been smouldering away as the police investigate, and soon we will know if it could still cause Number 10 damage.
OK, Ben, thank you. Ben Wright there, live at Westminster. In China, the city of Shanghai, home to nearly 25 million people, is heading into lockdown to combat a resurgence of coronavirus cases. Shanghai is a key financial and manufacturing hub, with restrictions being imposed in the eastern half of the city today and the western half from Friday. In the last 2 years, China has enforced a strict zero-COVID policy using swift lockdowns and aggressive restrictions. But the emergence of more transmissible variants are proving harder to contain. Here's our China correspondent, Stephen McDonnell.
Panic buying led to fights as Shanghai's 25 million residents prepared to go into lockdown. From today, the east side of the financial capital is a ghost town. The west side will follow on Friday. Across China, daily COVID tests are mostly orderly, but at times chaotic. In the third year of this crisis, the government's complete elimination strategy is under huge strain, with signs of pandemic exhaustion. Those who break the rules are being taken away by the police. Some are forced to make public confessions. Here, a woman pleads to be allowed to leave home so her husband can receive urgent cancer treatment. From the northeast to the south, tens of millions of people are now confined to their homes.
Beijing as a city is not under lockdown, but if you live in this compound right now, you can't leave. That's because there's been a case here. Now, these are the deliveries of food and other provisions. You can see they're marked up according to the flat number, and the staff here will take these provisions and deliver them to people, and that way everybody can stay inside for the next 2 weeks.
In Hong Kong, 6,000 mostly elderly, non-vaccinated people died in 2 months. Yet it's thought that nearly half the population was infected, boosting herd immunity.
China, by learning from the mistakes that Hong Kong have made, they will be upscaling the vaccination, especially among the elderly.
On the mainland, officials say the vaccine booster rate for those over 80 is at only 19.7%. One 85-year-old tells us she and her husband have only just been vaccinated.
I'm not worried. We just need to be careful.
Chinese people do what they are told. They listen to the government.
Yet it's hard for the party to shift when it's making political mileage attacking other countries for sacrificing lives by opening up.
If we chose to lay down now, our efforts will have come to nothing. We unswervingly insist on zero COVID.
Blue fences mark communities under strict isolation. The world's COVID emergency started here. It looks like this will be the last country to emerge from it. Stephen McDonald, BBC News, Beijing.
A second P&O ferry is being detained after failing a safety inspection. The Maritime and Coast Guard Agency says the Pride of Kent is being held in Dover and is one of 8 ships requiring inspections before re-entering service after P&O sacked 800 staff with no notice last week. In a letter today, the Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, says the company's boss has been given one final opportunity to re-employ sacked staff on their previous salaries. Anushi Ashuri, the British Iranian man who was freed from prison in Tehran earlier this month, has spoken about his experience of being held on spying charges since 2017. The 68-year-old was released alongside Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe after the UK settled a historic military debt with Iran. He's been speaking to our diplomatic correspondent, Caroline Hawley.
Finally free and back home.
Well done, well done. Good girl. Give it to me.
Anushi Ashuri spent almost 5 years in a jail he describes as hell. He can hardly believe the nightmare's over.
I'm trying to pinch myself to see that this is the reality and I don't want to wake up to myself.
He drew a sketch of one of the cells. This is where he was held after he attempted several times to take his own life. Can you describe that hell for us? I know in your cell you had bed bugs, cockroaches, there were rats, but what was it like?
I mean, there are people there who are like zombies. They just go back and forth in the yard. Sometimes you see they're talking to themselves and gesticulating, and they are in their own world.
Because of what they've been through?
Yes. When you are in your cell, you are always looking behind you. You are always trying to remember all the good memories that you had with your family.
You're living in your memories, I think.
Yeah, in fact, you are living in your memories.
And is it those memories that keep you going?
Yes. And otherwise I would go insane.
Why do you think you were arrested?
You always ask, why me? It wasn't me who was important. I wasn't important to any sides. It was the passport that was being arrested. But that the holder of that passport was me.
Anushi, who do you blame for what you've been through?
Well, most of all, my captors. But then again, the British government at the leadership level. Yes, for the procrastination that in fact happened. They could have done this much earlier. Nazanin could see her beautiful daughter much earlier. I could be back with my family. This was a debt that had to be paid. Why didn't you do it earlier? Why do we have to go through all these years? Could they stand or even one day of it at Evin prison? If they had actually experienced that, then they would have done it much earlier.
And Sherry, yes. How does it feel to have him back?
I'm not usually lost for words, but I think this time I was.
And has he changed much?
He's developed a few odd habits. Yeah, he keeps asking permission for stuff, to take mugs, to I don't know, very normal things that you don't ask permission for.
Still, at night, sometimes I touch Sherry's hand as we are asleep to see if this is real, this is happening. And I am fearful that I may wake up and see that all of it was a nice dream, and I'm still back, and I still have to wait for another 6 years to finish my sentence.
Anushi Ashuri there speaking to Caroline Hawley, and you can hear more of that interview tomorrow morning on BBC Breakfast. Tomorrow, the royal family will gather at Westminster Abbey for a Thanksgiving service in memory of Prince Philip. It's hoped the Queen will be able to attend. It will also be Prince Andrew's first public appearance since his father's funeral last April. For so many families, like the royals, forced to hold funerals under COVID restrictions, later celebrations of a life are an important part of the grieving process. Our royal correspondent Daniela Ralph has that story.
Giving thanks for 99 years of life as a public servant, as a naval officer, and as a family man. It's almost a year since Prince Philip died. Like so many others, the royal family held a funeral with only 30 guests. The Queen, a vivid image of grieving during COVID restrictions.
Seeing her dressed in black alone, this speaks of so many people's experience. Even in death, really, losing somebody, she still keeps her dignity. A chance to say thank you, I think, would be wonderful, and healing as well at the same time.
The Thanksgiving service here for Prince Philip will be a celebration of a life on a grand scale. But across the country, families who held restricted funerals, whose mourning was limited by COVID, are now finding ways to celebrate the lives of the people they loved.
It was one of his favourite pieces of music. Now Sue Horsfall has learnt it too, her own tribute to her husband Steve. Steve died of complications from COVID in 2020. With a small funeral, the family couldn't properly celebrate the full life he'd lived. Now, with greater freedom, they're planning a mini music festival in his honour.
And has losing Steve changed your perspective on your own life?
Steve's philosophy is you only die once, but you live life every day. And if I can, I'll get there in a minute. If I can live my life the same way that Steve did and enjoy every day of my life, then I've done good.
Yeah. The Duke of Edinburgh created the award scheme in his name to empower young people. Tomorrow, many of them will be at the service to say thank you.
His vision and his legacy absolutely live on at the heart of the award. And I think, we have a bright future, which I think is something that hopefully the Duke will be very proud of.
And a piece of advice for tomorrow from those who know. Prince Philip liked his church services short.
If people go on and on and on and on, he will say, you could have done that in 2 sentences.
Daniela Ralph, BBC News.
That's it. Now on BBC One, time for the news where you are. Have a very good night.